Well, welcome everybody to our DRB University session for today. Hope everybody can see everything all right. Hopefully you can see my screen that I'm sharing that has a DRB University logo on it. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Today we've got a great session for you. Hopefully it'll be interactive and useful to your business. So without any further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. Today we're going to talk about XPT hardware within the SiteWatch system. We have another one of these courses that is more suited for the Patheon system. So if you have the Patheon system, you're welcome to come to that one as well. Although a lot of the hardware information that'll be presented in today's training is pretty universal between the two products. So you will gain knowledge whether you're Patheon or SiteWatch, but this is primarily suited and geared for the SiteWatch folks. So we're going to cover obviously an overview of the different types of the XPTs that we have, the XPT hardware. How do we identify it? Very often, depending on if you go from site to site, sometimes it's just identifying which version of the XPT you're working on is the first barrier to troubleshooting. So we're just going to give you some tips and tricks on how to do that. What are some things we can do if we don't have keys to open up the XPT? Are there things we can actually do to help troubleshoot or to operate the system? So there are some things that you can do, and we'll kind of go over those. And then when you are out of service, what are the top things that take you out of service? And what are some tips and tricks of things that you can do when you are out of service? All right. Well, without much further ado, like I said, we'll go ahead and get started with the content. So today we're going to talk specifically about how an XPT connects to the SiteWatch network. What does each connection do? What's kind of the standard protocol or the standard connections that we use? And this is more to help you just be aware in general of the different points of where we connect. In systems analysis or systems troubleshooting technique, they may also refer to these as potential failure points. So understanding what each of the connections do, where they're connected, what the connections look like, and then obviously the functions that they handle is certainly a big part of that. We'll first take a look at this diagram of just a general XPT in the SiteWatch system. And we'll start really from the upper left-hand corner. Hopefully you can see my cursor here. The sonic wall router, if you know anything about computer hardware, the router has two main functions really. It brings your internet connection that's from your site into our SiteWatch system. And then also it handles the traffic to all the different networks on the SiteWatch network. And when I say networks, yes, it's one device, but it has multiple ports. And each of those ports is really what we call firewalled off from the other ports. In other words, it's got a software that protects certain services from communicating across networks. Why is that important? Because if you're ever collecting sensitive information like a customer's credit card, well, you don't necessarily need to share that credit card collection information with a network that just does something like handles your cameras or just does something like handles tunnel watch and turns the devices on in the tunnel. So you have separate networks. And those separate networks really are defined on our switch that's back at the main office. So you've got your router, it's got some software firewall rules in it. It's got a different port that kind of connects into each of these subnetworks. The main networks you're going to see, the one that's labeled in red, is what we call our CDE, or our main credit card data environment, card holder data environment. That's the secure network. That's where your XPT terminals, any touch terminals that have credit cards would kind of pass through that network. If you do have our wireless tablets, for example, they actually will go through a different port. They go through a wireless CDE, which is on a 110 network versus a 100 network. Not that you necessarily need to know all of the addressing schemes, but I guess what I will say is that there's one switch typically that kind of separates your networks. And then between the switch and the XPT, you may have another switch, or, certainly there's a switch on the inside of the XPT as well. And that's shown by what we see down here at the bottom. So the switch that's in the XPT, this is a BVTech switch. It's a power over Ethernet switch. And why is that important? Well, there are a few devices on our network that actually can be powered up by this switch itself. So rather than having a power cable and a network cable run to the unit, we have just a single Ethernet cable with RJ45 jacks on the end, a single network cable. Same as what you'd have as like a computer at home if you have a PC that's plugged into a cable box or a router at home. We have one cable, but it carries both the power and the data to devices like LPR cameras and then also to the CarPix camera. So the LPR camera is the one that snaps a picture of the back. If you have our LPR service, the CarPix camera is what snaps a picture of the front of your vehicle, and that's used for our CarPix vehicle manager so you can see the pictures of your car. So if ever those devices are not working, LPR camera or the CarPix camera, you're not seeing an image or you're not seeing any indicator that there's power, really it's a single network cable that comes back to the switch inside the XPT. And by the way, if they're both out at the same time, just in general troubleshooting technique, one question I always ask is one device affected or are they all affected? If one device is affected, I can, this CarPix camera, if that's a problem, I can check the one cable that goes to that CarPix camera, make sure it's secure on both ends. If both my CarPix camera and an LPR camera or CarPix and some other device that's attached to this switch have lost power or they've lost their communications, then I would probably look more at the switch. So hopefully it's starting to make sense when I mention things like potential failure points. These diagrams, and by the way, we can, at your request, if you like, we can send these to you afterwards, these slides, and you could use them in your troubleshooting. We also have some troubleshooting documentation that we can send to kind of illustrate these connections and what they do. Now there's different types of connections. There's on our new XPT 5s and 5 Pluses, we have this kind of Phoenix block that we wire an 8-conductor cable into, and that talks to the FastPass reader enclosure. And on the inside of there, although we're not showing it in this diagram, there's a 9-pin serial connection that connects the actual reader to the enclosure box. So ultimately, it's about understanding how these things connect. And I would say to just take it back and go from the most simplest explanation, I would say take a look at how your devices connect and then snap a picture. When things are working well, when things are connected properly, snap a picture, maybe even label color code cables or label them 1, 2, 3, 4. You can certainly do some things that in the event that you have to troubleshoot or unplug or replug a cable or something inadvertently gets unplugged, you can plug it back in with confidence knowing that it goes into that port. This is something that I also like to share for free whenever I'm doing training on hardware troubleshooting, and that is just because it fits in the port doesn't mean that's where that plug goes. In fact, a good example of this is, in our old tunnel watch system and our old car watch and SiteWatch Blue keypads, they both had a connection that was the same size, about the size of an old telephone jack, and it had a little plastic clip on it, just like your phone would at home. However, if I plugged in my tunnel watch connector into where my keypad went, that keypad connector actually carried 12 volts and could actually burn up a component on the other end and cause a card to go faulty and obviously break communication. So again, that's just because it fits doesn't mean that that's where that plug goes. So if you can, while things are working, snap a picture as a reference, maybe label some cables or coordinate color labels on a cable versus a port, and that'll certainly help you out whenever you're troubleshooting these things in the future. Now I want to talk about the models of the XPT. There are different models. Throughout the years, we've had a few different varieties. You may, within your organization, have a few represented. But we'll kind of talk about the oldest ones. Our first XPTs were non-touch. It was more like the old school ATMs. If you're a little bit older like I am, you might remember driving up to an ATM. Before touchscreens were there, it was all glass. You'd have to hit the little soft buttons on the side or a soft membrane keypad on the bottom. And you're not, thinking about this, we're really talking about more than 15 years ago. Before 2010, touchscreens were not really a thing. So any unit that we had before then, you'd hit these little soft buttons on the side. One thing of note about these types of XPTs, by the way, this one, which is completely non-touch screen and has just the membrane or this area on the outer side, you've got 6 buttons on the left, 6 buttons on the right, and this number pad at the bottom that are touchable. To the left of the help button, both on this one and our next model that I'll show you, there is a hidden button, and that's what we call the maintenance mode button or the quick status button. You can press and hold that and go into the quick status screen. So that's the non-touch variety. You probably don't have any of those out there, but you might have our first touch screens. This one, the screen is a little bit smaller. I believe it's 9.7 inches on the diagonal. It's also got these soft buttons on the left, soft buttons on the right and the left, and then the help button would likely be located down here, and to the left of that, again, a soft button that would get you into the help screen. So this is touch screen, but you'll notice we're missing the number pad, and in its place we have a credit card reader kind of put right in the middle of the unit. So this is the touchscreen XPT. And then as we move on, we have then a 2012 XPT. You'll notice that the screen went from a 9.7 inch to kind of a 12 inch, so a little bit larger screen. The buttons got smaller on the left and right. The help button is still there. There's a hidden button here, so you still have those soft button membranes. But both of these units had touch screens that you could interact with, as well as soft buttons on the sides. This just has a larger screen, and you can kind of tell not much of a bevel at the top, a little bit smaller on the left and right, and obviously the screen going from a 9 inch to a 12 inch is a pretty drastic change there. Again, identifying them from the outside is probably the easiest thing to do. Then once we get into the XPT5, this is still the same size touchscreen, but you'll notice the entire front door is a little bit more of a flat design. So this is kind of curvy, with some protruding areas on the front, and then it gets more flat in its design with the XPT5. And I will probably say, to me, and again, this is just how my brain works, but probably the thing that is the most recognizable to me, they say humans can detect what looks like a face. And to me, when you go from this one where the door protrudes out to the XPT5 or 5 Plus, what I really see there, and I'm a child of the 80s, I kind of see a face of like the Transformers logo. You've got 2 eyes here and kind of a mouth here and that kind of look, or maybe it's one of those old helmets from the movie 300, something like that. I'm seeing that kind of as that area that protrudes on the front. So it's mostly flat. Then you've got this area here. You have your, if you do have the magnetic card reader, it's kind of inset on the inside of there. This is the XPT5. And then the 5 Plus, we actually went to a 15-inch screen, so much bigger screen. We've also added EMB readers in most of our new products. If you've converted to EMB or you move to our Patheon products, the EMB readers will be these ones that have the protrude, sticking out of the front, or more in the area like in between the eyes of that helmet, we'll call it. You either have an inset one, that means you're using a magnetic or our Mercury Pay product, and then this one here, you'd likely be using our Card Connect EMB product. So that's a quick way to just identify, first of all, which one am I using? Is it, non-touch? Is it the early touch? Is it the 2012 XPT with a 12-inch screen? Or is it one of the flat, larger doored XPT5s or 5 Pluses? The main difference there being the size of the screen. Is there a bevel on each edge, or does it extend to the edges of the screen? And that's a way you can identify it. Once you've identified that XPT, then it's all about understanding on the inside how things connect up. And so there's a couple different internal connections that we're going to talk about. 2012 and earlier XPTs, if you open them up, first off, it's dark. There isn't LED lighting on the inside of them. Another thing that you're going to notice is that it looks like if you've ever been on the inside of a computer and you just have, one board maybe connected to another board via a ribbon cable or multi-pinned Molex connectors and multi-pin cables. That's kind of what you would see when you open our 2012 and older XPTs. even though we try to keep them nice and tidy and maybe clipped out of the way, as far as cable management, a lot of the components, it's like a bunch of internal circuit boards that are just really connected to each other via ribbon cables and multi-pin power cables. So, and we'll see that as we look at some pictures here in a moment. So one of the quick ways to identify when you're on the inside is, does it look like, you know, just green circuit boards all connected together with a couple ribbon cables and power cables, or do we have more of a modular system? And you'll see what I mean by modular when we talk about the inside of the XPT5 and above. The XPT5 and 5 Plus also internally, rather than using those power cables and ribbon cables like those flat cables, we use standard USB cables. There's a couple different varieties that we use, but for the most part, we have kind of a main control module that's your computer, and it's got some female USB ports in it, and our peripheral devices such as printers and barcode scanners, etc., will be plugged in through USB for the most part. The 2012 5 and 5 Plus models are supported by SiteWatch and Patheon. Anything earlier than 2012 is not supported. And keep in mind, Patheon is an all EMV solution. So even if you are thinking about going to Patheon in the future and you're not currently on EMV, you would first need to EMV convert your organization and then kind of go to Patheon after that. Hopefully that makes sense. Let's talk about those USB connectors. One thing I like about USB, it stands for Universal Serial Bus. It was created, actually a long time ago was it created, but it was designed with the idea that it should be for plug and play operating systems. In other words, you should be able to unplug and replug these devices while the computer's running. The computer should be able to detect the communications on the line. So they're really low voltage, 500 milliamps or less typically is what your devices would draw. The connection that we see here, type A, is usually the type that plugs into what we call the computer side, although there are some variations on that. If you ever looked at the back of some of your receipt printers, for example, if you have our Bixalon printer, it has a type A on both connections, type A on the computer side, type A on the printer side. Most other printers, by the way, that we've ever sold, whether they be report printers or receipt printers, have this type B style connection. In fact, if you have a printer at home that's hooked up with a USB cable, it would likely also have the type B connection and a type A on the other end on our older machines. We don't really have any type C, which is kind of the new oval shaped connection, anywhere on our DRB computers. So we've removed that from here, but I think most people are familiar with that, like with their personal devices, cell phones, and most electronic devices now have kind of a USB-C connection for data and power. Internally in the XPT, the mini B connection is used for the connection to the printer, I know, and the micro B is used specifically for the data connection to your barcode imager. So we do have each of these. This is reflected on the printer. This is reflected on the barcode imager. And then this one would be not necessarily in the XPT, but any other terminals that might have point of sale receipt printers would have this type B. Why am I bringing this up? Because in the case of simple troubleshooting, oftentimes it's just if you were actually part of our simple troubleshooting, which is our CWH01 course, we give you a little acronym, which is, when your system hits cardiac arrest, when something stops working, what do? You check CPR or you perform CPR. CPR stands for C, connections, P, power, and then R, reboot or restart. And really, the most important things that give you confidence in doing those things on site is A, understanding how your things connect. So again, snap a picture of it when it's working, label things if you can, put color indicators so you know which cable goes to which port. And then even in the event you have someone who's not very confident from a hardware perspective, if they have your picture as a reference and something gets unplugged, or you tell them, hey, unplug the cable that we have labeled with that, purple tape, that's an easy thing to do, and they feel more confident doing those types of things. I also want to point out serial connectors are used. You've got a 9-pin on the left-hand side and a 25-pin on the right. The 9-pin internally of the XPTs may be used on certain types of bill dispensers. Could also be used for certain variations of our FastPass readers being wired directly in with maybe some power injectors if they're not using if it's an older installation, or we could have FastPass cables that are power injected or wired into a 9-pin connection on the inside of the 2012 or earlier XPTs. The 25-pin connectors, they could be on the back of printers, serial printers. They could also, this would be underneath our proprietary board that runs your blue keypads. If you have one of those boards, it's called the Serial Relay Multiplexer board. And that 25-pin connector at the bottom actually connects out to third-party tunnel controllers. So if you have a PLC controller or a third-party controller that connects in via that 25-pin connection, this would be what that looks like. So on the inside of the XPT, again, we're kind of just looking, hopefully allowing you to see what these things kind of look like on the inside. Again, when you see a lot of these open circuit boards and multiple cables, you're probably looking at an older XPT. There's different types of video connectors on our newer XPTs. We have a HDMI cable, which kind of looks like just your HDMI connectors to your home electronics, whereas on the older units, we may have what's called this LVD which is low voltage display signal. It actually will carry the power to power up the display as well as the signal. So the cable's usually a little bit more beefy, and it's kind of got some clips that clip on the outside. If you ever see your XPT where you have like color lines or something like that through it, and it's just doesn't seem like it's booting into the operating system completely, or it just looks like maybe you have white on one side and black on the other, or you have these vertical lines that typically that indicates something in this LVDS cable is not properly seated. So this is a low voltage display signal. However, this isn't like USB, unplug and replug with the unit on. Oftentimes, these types of connections can get susceptible to interference. So I tell folks, power that XPT off, remove the cable on one end. And whenever we say reseat the cable, cables typically have two sides, right? So unplug the cable on the computer side, unplug the cable on the device side. Here, we're talking about computer side is over here, and then on the door you've got the same one that's plugged into the display side. So the display side, the computer side of the same cable. What you aren't seeing here is there's a metal plate that typically will cover over this door display I/O board, and for the sake of being able to see this, we've kind of removed that in this picture. But that would be one where I would inform you, go ahead and power the XPT down with the power switch inside the XPT and unplug those cables. It's also a good reminder, the way that I just said that there, oftentimes people are like, hey, powering off a computer, can I just hit a power button? In most cases for Windows PCs, the answer is no. You probably should shut down Windows first. That way you're certain that all your programs are closed, all your data connections are finalized, and all your data is written. You're not going to have any problems. And if you shut down through Windows, you're just making sure that everything is kind of elegantly closed. Excuse me. In the case of the XPT, it works a little bit differently, and that is when it's running and talking to SiteWatch, it's running a little application that really isn't storing much local data other than things like log files and counter files. I also want to point out that we use drives that employ something called write caching, which means even if you power off the power switch, the data will continue to be written before the computer will actually shut down. And we use solid state drives on all of our modern XPTs with that technology employed. So I can confidently say you should be able to just hit the power switch on the XPT, and you're not as likely to corrupt any of those types of files that would prevent that XPT from operating. There is a reboot menu within the staff screen or within the maintenance mode of the unit, which we'll show you here in a moment. But in the event that you're unplugging and reseating these types of connections, you really want to hit that power button that's kind of centered. Once you open the door, go back to the center, usually center, and then towards the rear and the bottom is where you're going to find your power buttons. The I2C connectors, this is a really poor picture, I apologize, but usually you've got white receptacles, and then plugged into those, you're going to have multiple, oh, I thought I had a better picture than that. Actually, an earlier picture, this one right here, where you see this blue and yellow, and then you've got a red and black. This kind of 4-pin, the red and black carry your voltage, 5 volts, and then the blue and yellow carry the data, the transmission. And this is a serial communication. So interestingly, think of it like this is making a big trip to all of your devices that use I2C or inter-integrated. It's actually called I2C, inter-integrated circuit. And ultimately, think of it like that you're taking a trip through all those devices. Since they're serial in nature, each device has to be kind of addressed on its own. And then also, if one of those devices fails, you could have multiple devices report a failure. So if you get a multiple device not presence on one of our older XPTs, it could mean one of those devices in that circuit has failed and it's prevented the communications to the other devices as well. This is also one, like the LVDS cable, these are power the XPT down. You can unseat and reseat these. Typically, the thing that can happen is a port can go bad sometimes, or the chip that controls the port communications for inter-integrated circuits can go bad. There are some diagnostics that can be done. I would say once you're getting to the point where you're getting multiple device not presence or something like that, if you do a simple reseat of those connectors and power back on, and you're still having a problem, give the DRB Knowledge Center a call. We can help you run some onboard diagnostics to check those ports. So there are some things, and these are what you really want to empower your employees with, some topics of being able to do some things without even getting on the inside of the XPT. And this is if you have something like bill accepting, bill dispensing, coin accepting, coin dispensing, barcode scanning, printing. You can test often those functionalities. You can even test your CarPix camera in certain instances to make sure you're getting an image, to make sure you can control the gates, open and close the gates. So ultimately, how do we do that? We need to get in to maintenance mode. So if your XPT is not in service, you may have something like this on the screen. I'm going to go ahead and flip on over to my demo XPT here. And yes, I am in service, but what I will do is I will press and hold that quick status button. So on XPT 2012 and earlier, that's that little hidden depression in the plastic just to the left of the help button. On XPT 5 and later, it's its own circular button. I would also say, we were talking about identification, and I mentioned kind of that face. The other major thing that lets me know that this is an XPT 5 or later is that your help button is a silver unique button rather than being a soft button. So if you've got a silver help button, you've got XPT 5 or 5 Plus. And the main difference there is 5's got a smaller screen, 5 Plus, the screen kind of goes to the edges. If you press and hold the help button to 3, after 3 seconds, it goes into the normal operation quick status screen. This screen is great because it gives us a lot of help right away. If you are out of service, this screen will automatically be showing red. The background color will be red, and any device that is taking you out of service will show red here. So you could have something like out of service, and if you go into the maintenance mode, you'll notice I will be able to see my entire list of devices, but only once I tell the system that I have a password to view those statuses and perform those diagnostic capabilities. So you can type your SiteWatch employee number and password, and that'll take you right into the full maintenance screen where now we see all the hardware, not just the main computer name and profile and network. Now we're seeing everything, including our bill acceptors, coin acceptors, barcode readers, and I can even do some things where I can simulate there being, certain problems. Like, for example, I've got coin hoppers here, a front hopper and a back hopper, and I can simulate them being empty. And you'll notice it changes to a warning state. So a warning state's really, hey, you're low on change, you're low on bills, you're low on coins, or you're low on paper. You're going to get that status going to purple. It'll give you more of a warning. And then if you get something like your paper goes completely out, that's a warning in some instances. If you have a backup printer and you can print to something else, that's more of a warning. If you aren't configured with a backup printer and your paper goes out, that can actually take your entire XPT offline, and that could take you out of service. In fact, that was probably the number one thing that could take your XPT out of service, was kind of a paper out situation. So understanding what these show and what they could potentially mean is very important. Another thing that is pretty important is you'll notice here I'm connected over the network. So I've got my local TCP/IP address. This, by the way, is going to be way different than what you see on a practical site in the field. What we're seeing here now is more of a DRB internal address or a shared address by my virtual machine actually that I'm running in. And you would typically see something in the 192.168.100 dot something address scheme. That's your card holder data environment. First of all, if you don't see a network connection, check that hub, check the switch, make sure all your network cables internally to the XPT are making good connections. If it doesn't show SiteWatch connected, and this is actually a really fun one, if you power off and power on the XPT, but you leave the door open, it doesn't actually detect being connected to SiteWatch and trying to download its configuration until you close and lock up the door. So let me kind of show you what I mean by that. If I hit exit, watch what happens here. This is kind of simulating what happens when you close your door. It connects to the server, it downloads its configuration and updates, and it does that every time you go into the maintenance mode and out. So that's actually a good tip to know. If somebody sent you some new graphics or a new configuration and you need to reload it, you can go into your quick status screen. You do have to log in, because notice if I just click exit, it doesn't do anything. But if you go into the quick status screen and then log in using your employee number and password, and then exit out, that's actually the same as if you press the reload terminal on your point of sale stations. It reloads your configuration, re-downloads everything. So if you have a configuration change that's not working, that would be one thing that you can do. So out of service XPTs, we talked about what are some tips and tricks. Obviously, the paper out is the first thing that you can do there. If that continually takes you out of service, give us a call, because we can set up another printer on site, whether it's in the office or whether it's in the tunnel or whether it's at another lane. We can set that up as a backup printer. So in the event your XPT goes out of service just during normal operation during the day, it can fail over to that other machine and not cause a disruption where it takes you out of service. Also, things like our credit card readers. If you're a credit card only type of site, you could potentially go out of service if you lose your internet connection. So I would say if you're a Card Connect or a credit card only EMV solution, having a backup internet connection is probably the most important thing to keep the uptime of your XPT still running. And then the other things, ultimately, if you're out of service, the quickest tip and the best tip is log in with an employee that has access to this maintenance mode, and then anything in red here. So anything in red means it's critical, a critical device to the XPT. It won't work without it. So that could include a certain number of devices internal to the XPT, or the network connection obviously is critical to this thing being in service, because you need to talk to the server to communicate back and forth. So the main quick tip, papers, the first thing that's going to take you out of service. After that, anything that's red here is a critical device. In some cases, you can go into the enable and test hardware menu. And this is where I mentioned these are all the things that you can test without even opening the door. Notice I've got some inputs over here. I know it may be hard to see, but I've got some inputs over here that can simulate me opening the lock, opening the door. I haven't actually opened the lock or the door yet. I'm doing all these things right from the screen using my password. So I can test things like the gates. I can test my camera to see if I'm getting a picture in the lane, and it'll actually be a live picture, so you can use that to help focus the camera. I can go into the gate and open and close the gate when I'm talking to my gate. I can reset the control module of the XPT. I can go into my miscellaneous inputs. So if I've got like coin acceptors, for example, coin dispensers, I can disable and re-enable these devices. And think about disabling and re-enabling. When we're talking about that CPR, you've got connections, power, and reset. Disabling and enabling a device, that's the same as that R. It's a reset. It's basically telling our system, start talking to that piece of hardware again. Disable the connection, re-enable the connection. It's kind of like, me, when I have a communications issue with my wife, sometimes I need to just stop and start over, right? That's basically what we're doing. You're disabling the communications, you're restarting that communications, and if it reports that it's back online, it just means there was a breakdown. And oftentimes disabling and enabling, that's probably quick tip number 2 for your hardware without having to reboot. Sometimes within seconds, you can just disable and re-enable a device and it'll be back online. For things like our network gates, it's a little bit more, there's a little bit more to it if those are offline or you're getting issues with loops not reporting right. We do have a reset gate button there. However, what that does is it sends a gate control module reset, and you have to walk over to the gate and acknowledge that that's reset, and then it will restart itself. But when it restarts itself, keep in mind that one of the things the gate does when it starts up is the gate arm goes slowly up, and then it comes slowly back down. You may be familiar with that from being on site, and that actually, think of that as a timer. When that gate arm slowly goes up and down, what it's actually doing is it's calibrating your in-ground loops. So if you lose power or you power cycle that gate while you have cars in the lane, that's a big problem because now it's recalibrating all those loops. It's assuming that everything's empty, but if you have cars actually over them, when it assumes it's empty, it's gonna set that calibration all wrong. So, long story short, there, when we're talking gate hardware, if it's ever acting weird, the gate won't go up or it won't go down on its own anymore. I would say clear everything off, clear all lanes, clear all vehicles out, manually open the gate with a key if you have to get people through, cone the lanes off, and then power cycle those gates completely empty. The merge zone completely empty, the gates completely empty. That's going to recalibrate everything just fine for you. And again, you can test a lot of other things from these menus as well. You can dispense test bills if you have the correct security. You can do bill acceptance, and you can actually tell it whether or not you want it to stack the bill or to just eject it. If you click stack, you put your bill in and it's gone. You're going to have to open up the vault to get it back out. If you say ejecting bills, then you put your bill in and then it just spits it right back out the same chute. But it will tell you what it counted, or if it can read the bill. If it read a 1 or a 5 or a 10, that means great, it's clean and it can detect the right bill pattern. If it doesn't detect the right bill, if it sucks it in and then spits it back out and it gives you an error or it doesn't show the right bill count, then you know, okay, I've got to clean my bill acceptor chute. So those are the types of things that we're talking about. You can test your payment card reader, put a card in. If it's a magnetic card reader, you can see if it reads things. Your receipt printer, you can try to print with different printer density, and you can hit this print test receipt button, and that'll actually, print a receipt out of your receipt paper. It's doing it on screen here to kind of simulate that, but it would have a barcode on it then as well that you could then take over to your barcode scanner and test. So there's a lot of hardware tests that you can do: barcode scanner, printer, payment card reader, gates, your cameras, and all you've got to do is just press the button to go in there. In addition to testing, you can do simple resets on that hardware as well. So hopefully that, I know that took probably a little bit longer than you were expecting, but this is that quick status when you're in a error condition. or and in my instance, it's that SiteWatch is not connected. And I'll leave you with this. This is one of those funny things, is that SiteWatch is often not connected just because you've rebooted it, but you kept the door open. Because remember, it can't make a connection to SiteWatch for the very first time until you close the door, lock it up, and then it'll start communicating. That's just how SiteWatch works. Also, another quick tip, you'll notice here this attention message on, and it says press to hide. If you're getting a message from the system, like, hey, the car's sitting, the fast pass is blocked because it's in use at another terminal, or your ARM customer is out of units, so they need to buy a wash or something. Sometimes we don't program the screens properly to understand all errors. So maybe you're just getting a flashing attention light saying, hey, there's an error. If you go into this quick status screen and you turn on the attention message, it's going to tell you exactly what that error is. It'll say, ARM plan out of units, or fast pass tag blocked, in use at another lane, or it'll give you the actual error message that is actionable. So that's actually something from a software perspective that'll also help you figure out why the customer isn't able to be redeemed for whatever reason. If you press and hold the help button, obviously that's how you get into that quick status screen. And once you're in there and it's normal, you've got the blue background, you can change. There's like a color profile button that you can actually change as well. That's more color friendly for folks that may have red-green color blindness. These are kind of the similar screens in the Patheon system. It tells you, you don't have to go one level deeper. I mean, it's the same kind of screen. Degraded is yellow rather than purple, and disconnected is red, which is the same as a critical failure. The security login, I showed you, you can press and hold and log in with your password. If you do scan a barcode, however, it will look something like this with the new software, where it has you enter your terminal password in as well as kind of a PIN. And then this can give you access to your staff screen. And I know there's a lot of buttons here. We could spend a lot of time going in what each of these do. Ultimately, just know this staff screen is completely configurable by you. And typically it has things like, update the FastPass tag, manually open the gate, find customer by the last four of their credit card, or manually enter their preferred customer number, LP, or FastPass tag number, or find them by name. This is usually when you can't redeem the customer, or we can't automatically detect who they are. You can find them manually. Sometimes you'll have a separate page where you could do rewashes if you just want to get them through. But this is completely customizable, the staff screen or screens that you are able to view once you're in that maintenance mode. All right. We talked about hardware degradation already. Basically, if you're low on bills, or you're low on receipt paper, you're low on plastic cards, if you're going to be dispensing cards, it's going to show purple. In the case of the receipt printer, a good tip and trick would be to have a backup set up. And if you've never had that before, it's a quick call to the Knowledge Center, usually a 10-minute call. We can get that set up for you.
So just because you did it most recently, on that staff screen on the XPT, I customize all that, and I just have like coupons and rewashes and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. You can actually update tags on that screen, it looks like.
Yep. Yeah. In fact, so do you have license plate recognition or FastPass tags?
It's FastPass.
Okay. Yeah, you can have an add update FastPass tag. So if you get a tag in the sale first, which I didn't feed a tag to it, but if there was already a tag there in the sale, and you know how it shows on the little sample receipt, the FastPass tag that you've already detected, right. You can replace that. Also, if you find a customer and put them in, find a customer and bring them up, you can then hit the add update tag as well, and that will allow you to add that right then and there. So if you're selling right at the XPT, if you have somebody out there with tags in their pocket with one of those, RF shielded wallets or whatever, you can just pull a tag out, add the tag, scan it, or type it in, and add it right then and there in the lane as the sale, even before you sell The way SiteWatch works, you can scan it at any time, and it'll just put it in the sale. And then as you add a plan or even your washes, it'll assign the history of that transaction to that tag.
Gotcha. Yeah, we sell out there, but I never knew you could update, so I'll probably mess around with that.
Yep.
And then I wanted to ask you on one of my gates, I'm having to physically reset it. It's basically daily at this point. I've switched out loop cards, and
Oh,
they
wow. Okay.
mentioned it could be the actual loop itself. And, they're underground, so it's not ideal to tear all that up. So they mentioned like a pad that gets installed somehow. Do you have anything on that you have
I've
experience
got
with?
a little bit of information, sure. So there's a couple things. One, if you haven't explored loop sensitivity yet, there's kind of a low, medium, and a high sensitivity for your loops. And
Mm-hmm.
really, there's a couple different types of loops. The typical loop, those cut-in ones that are in the concrete that you kind of build in to the ground, those you kind of wrap your own wire, and you're supposed to have so many turns per foot. And that's actually very, very important because these are magnetic induction loops. And if you don't have so many turns per foot in the wire and everything, you're actually changing the electromagnetic characteristics of the wire. So one thing that can happen is with age, the wire can get brittle and it can crack or break. And so even if you're in an environment where you get a little bit colder to freezing and then back warmer again, colder, warmer. In Ohio, it's very prevalent up here. You can actually create micro fractures in the copper. And so what will happen is that when you lose that connection, you basically have to reset it to kind of recalibrate the loop and re-energize it. But I will say, if you think it's the in-ground loop, like what I would suggest if you haven't done this first, you may be on like a low to mid sensitivity, and maybe just over the years, if the quality of the cable has degraded, you might have to bump it up to a medium or high sensitivity in order to pick up vehicles that you aren't picking up anymore. Um, and then also, if you have two lanes next to each other, you can alternate the frequency. So you can have high over here and low over here, because what can happen is if you have high sensitivity, it can actually pick up the metal from the other lane as well. And so you could potentially have one car from one lane being picked up in the other lane. So I would say you could play with sensitivity first. If you've already been through kind of down that road with testing different settings with our knowledge center, we do have surface mounted. I don't have the actual part numbers here because our system's completely different. But if you were to call our service or our sales department, when you call the front line and they get you to the orders team, they have what they call surface mounted loops that you can purchase. That you can put them right on. There's different varieties. There's pave over loops, and then there's surface mounted loops. And the surface mounted loops, you kind of just disconnect the old loop, put these things kind of down, and like you said, it's more like a pad. I would say those are they're not good for locations that might use something like, if you ever have snow plows or something coming into your lot, those things would get ripped right up. But if you're a site that, doesn't have to deal with snow or that type of thing, these things can work okay, for sure.
Gotcha. Where's those sensitivity settings for those loops at?
In the gate itself, basically, there's different menus within the gates. In fact, I can send you our magnetic gate troubleshooting document. It has all the menus. Off the top of my head, I'm kind of blanking out which menu, but you kind of go into the loop screen and then you pick the individual loops. Obviously, there's a reset loop. So you figure out which loop you're having a problem with. Is it the proximity loop as you're driving up? Is it the reset loop because the arm's not going down? Or is it your merge loop because maybe the gates aren't opening regularly? So you get different symptoms based on the loop failure, which loop it is. Then once you determine that loop, the presence loop is loop B, the reset loop is loop A, and then the merge loop is loop C, or 1, 2, 3 ABC. They kind of correlate to the same thing. So loop 1 reset, loop 2 is presence, loop 3 or C is your merge loop. Basically, you go into that one that you think you're having the problem with, And usually, if your gates aren't going down, it's A. If it's not picking up the car automatically when you come there, it's typically B. And then you just, once you're in that individual loop, usually it's a toggle between like low, medium, and high, I believe, as far as the loop frequency. So,
Gotcha. Yeah, if you could send that over, that'd be great. Because yeah, they never mentioned stuff like that. They just mentioned the replacement.
yeah,
And then they recommended that loop card, which, like I said, I tried, and it didn't.
yeah, and the detector card is going to use the same settings that are stored in the brains your gate control module. So it's going to be running it at the same sensitivity as before if you've never changed that. So yeah, I'd be happy to send that document over to you after our training. It'll be in a few hours. I do have a meeting that I'm going to be at where I'm joining our QA team for the next couple hours, but I will send it this afternoon to you. Any other questions?
Awesome. Well, yeah. No, I appreciate your time, and yeah, thanks.
Certainly. You guys have a great rest of your day, and I appreciate you coming out for our training today. Thanks a lot.
Yep. You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.